Welcome to our national conversation.
So today's social event is called the Gen Z Roundtable, where we aim to understand and share the perspectives Gen Z has on politics in the upcoming 2024 presidential election. And as I said before, who better than to lead the conversation than our department heads of the core writing team? But I still encourage all of us to participate, especially if you are Gen Z or even if you're millennials and have a interesting perspective or are baby boomers here. I still welcome you to share your own perspectives as well. And we have, as you heard before, Devin Peters and Connor Chung here. Devin and Connor, do you want to introduce yourselves real quick?
Sure. My name's Connor, Connor Chung, and this is my second semester here at ONC. Last semester, I was brought on as a conservative writer, and now I'm taking up the position of core content team lead, which I'm definitely enjoying, taking up a little bit more responsibility. And I love to write, obviously. That's why I joined the organization. So being in a position where I'm able to interact with and manage a team of writers and give them feedback, it's like that's kind of part of my biggest dream is doing that sort of work for a living. So to be able to start in my in the professional realm here with ONC, and also to get behind a worthwhile cause, right? Our nation is kind of in dire straits right now, so to make an effort to contribute to amending that situation is important to me. But aside from that, I guess a little bit about me. I did my BA in Russian Studies up in Canada at the University of Calgary. And right now I'm pursuing my MA in Global Affairs at the University of Oklahoma. And that's it. Technically, I'm a millennial. I was born in the last year, but I have friends who are both Gen Z and millennials. So I kind of get both perspectives, I feel like.
Okay, so my name's Devin Peters. I am the core content director here at ONC. I undergo basically everything from the editorial team to the writers team, overseeing US-China relations and their projects, and the polling team. I'm a senior at Florida State University. I also work for my local government at City Hall for my representative, Jack Porter. She's a city commissioner. And I also am being integrated into the Democratic Party here in Florida within the next couple of weeks, which is exciting for me. So, yeah, just trying to obviously progress myself in my career. And also, this is my third semester now at ONC. It will be a whole year within the next 3 months, which is kind of weird to think about. But it's been a great experience. Obviously, I'm very politically engaged, whether it comes historically slash just contemporary. And my role here is just to enhance ONC's output when it comes to the contents that we distribute on a daily basis. And obviously, partisanship is high, despite me even being a partisan in the summit and on my downtime. But the goal here at ONC is to reduce it as much as possible to create a conversation that has appropriate discourse that could be functionally sufficient, so that way we can actually try to meet some compromise in instances. So, but yeah, that's basically it on my end.
Amazing. And as we know, Gen Z and like millennials are gonna be the new Americana. And if you guys know Halsey, I did rip off that song title. But we're the new Americana. We also know that Gen Z is not a monolith. There are varying political ideologies from the traditional Democrat and Republican to even the Marxist. I know there's some Marxists here, which is going to be interesting if they choose to speak. However, what is shared among Gen Z, and I would even say millennials, is this desire for change, right? The political potency of Gen Z can be illustrated in their engagement on issues like the environment, education, gun control, racial justice, and building back America. And to start us off, we saw some statistics coming out of Good Faith Media, which shows us that more than half of Gen Zers, about 58%, and almost three-fourths of those who identify as Democrats, say the country's problem can be only solved with the general change in leadership. So, do we think Gen Z is cynical when it comes to politics? And does this mean Gen Z distrusts the political system? Connor and Devin, what do we think of that?
Um, I don't. That's a tough one because I think Gen Z is a very political generation. And also, I think they're concerned with being college educated, which is never a bad thing, right? That's important. Um, but that being said, I think what you saw over the last few decades was basically kind of like this long march through the institutions where uh, the more like usually more like left-leaning folks who became college educated went on to nail down professions in the universities and whatnot. And so I think that Gen Z is kind of following in those footsteps. And so I don't know if I think they are concerned with the state of our union and uh, with our government, but I don't necessarily. I wouldn't say that they're cynical. It's very split. I think they're supportive of the current administration and the efforts that they're making um, via various legislations and reform in our country. And so I'd say that the majority of Gen Z, this is just my opinion, that they're on board with that and maintaining the status quo that the baby boomers kind of like set up in place, and they're making adjustments to it. But I don't know. I wouldn't say they're too cynical. I think that they believe that reform can be achieved through democratic means, and they're working hard to do that by going to college and changing it from the inside. That's how I feel about it.
So on this specifically, I respectfully disagree with Connor's assertion, only because when it comes to the contemporary administration, at least with Biden, the youth, especially Democrats too, his polling numbers had dropped from around like, it could have been around 50 to 60-ish to where it's around in the 30s to 20s now. That's one of the biggest drawing points, at least from what I've read from the Biden administration, that they're trying to appeal to young voters because the approval rating is so low. Outside of his own 37%, which is like broadly speaking, his polling is obviously not doing very well for his approval rating. A lot of this has to do with the Israel-Gaza situation. It dropped immediately after October. Gen Z specifically is one of the most pro-Palestinian generations there's been thus far due to the conditions that are ongoing at the moment. So from my perspective, and also being one of them, I think our generation is exceptionally cynical, and it should be because of the complacency that has been uniformly like established by Republicans and Democrats alike. They're really not that far off, except for some minor policies pertaining to like LGBTQ rights and the border and stuff like that. But regardless overall though, like I think our generation is exceptionally cynical, especially considering the polling that's going on for Biden specifically right now. And that's coming from mostly like Democrat voting bases too. So, and then also, Gen Z is appreciative of the Trump administration, post 4 years ago. So yeah, no, like I said, along with being one of them, I would say that we are exceptionally cynical in the current under the current circumstances. So
Devin, real quick, I would just say that that's a good caveat. That's something that I forgot to point out is that that's where they do break from the status quo is being pro-Israel. That's something that Gen Z is most definitely not. And
pro LGBTQ as well. That as well.
Right, yeah, but like that follows in stride with the last few administrations, barring the Trump administration. But if you look back to the Obama administration, I mean, if you were to combine the legacy of the Biden administration and the Obama administration, I'd say that Gen Z would probably, if you were to ask them to reflect on that, they would probably give their support for most of the initiatives that those two presidential administrations we're undertaking, aside from partisan support for Israel.
I hear you. I would say
Right.
personally speaking, Connor, just to add to it, I'm in agreement because of the Obama administration, obviously, allowance of like gay marriage and stuff like that, 2013.
Right.
Awesome.
Progressive initiatives.
But
These are
personally
things that
speaking,
need to really
I find that to be the bare minimum, and I think we could push far more. So these standards that we establish have deviated greatly considering millennials of 2013 to Gen Z of 2024. So
do you think both anyone, and again, anyone can jump in this question as well, do we think we just need a general change in leadership, or do we need to change the way we approach politics? For example, do we need to stick with the status quo when it comes to just having two major political parties? Should we open up for a third? Do you think that could change the way Gen Z approaches politics?
That'll probably be difficult, Tanya. I think there are powerful vested interests in maintaining the two-party system. That's a rabbit hole. I'm not really exactly sure how to fix that, but I understand where you're coming from.
Citizens United needs to be de-established for a third party to come to fruition. Since Tanya mentioned it earlier, as a self-proclaimed Marxist, I would state that in this instance, we need to ally with the liberals to maintain the Biden administration, but following this, we need to do our best to abolish the status quo, which is obviously democratization of the workplace, greater liberties across the board for individuals in minority groups, and then the dissolution of the top 1%, not even top 1%, like the top like 30 to 40% wealth distribution on a wide scale to equal the balance of the economic realm. So
interesting perspectives we have here. Nathan did put in the chat that he's telling us that there are interesting stats that are coming out showing Gen Z females are getting more liberal and Gen Z men are becoming more conservative. Why do we think we're seeing this shift? Does it have to do with this like rise of more feminist trends going on, like the Me Too movement? Is more to do with identity politics? What do we think is going on that's creating this stark shift?
I think I'm just going to speak plainly here. I think young men are getting sick of identity politics, and I feel like they don't feel that they have a place in the world, because not in every case, but it does seem like society at every turn, whether you're watching TV or a commercial or any other sort of media or entertainment, is kind of espousing this narrative that tells young men that they're not worth very much just by virtue of the fact that they're men. And I think that makes them feel ostracized, and I don't think that it does a lot of good. It doesn't serve that cause well if you're trying to bring those people in to your circle. I think it just kind of fosters more division. So I think that's why we're kind of witnessing this return to, or at least among young men who are starting to lean more towards the right. That's just my opinion, though.
I see more of that type of discourse happening, actually, Connor, and we're also seeing that Gen Z adults are likely to be Democrat, and just like millennials, they're less likely to identify as Republicans. And why, again, are some people afraid to identify as Republicans? I mean, I believe you're a conservative writer. Do you think there's this sort of ostracization that Gen Z Republicans are facing in this upcoming political election?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'll tell you right now, it is tough being a young conservative. There's not too many of us, especially among Gen Z. Millennials are a little different, but especially among among Gen Z. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that people are just afraid to speak up, because right now we have a left-leaning majority establishment in this country, whether it's in the newspapers or in the media, um, and so forth. And so, also culturally, that's another thing I want to add, is that our culture is very, very left-leaning, which you're free to, you know, feel how you want to feel about that. But I think that because conservatives are now in the minority, it's difficult for young men to speak up and articulate themselves. That's not something I was able to do as a really young person. I mean, I'm still young. I'm in my late 20s, but I couldn't imagine, having to defend myself in my early 20s. I just wasn't quite there yet, like maturity wise, intellectually wise, I guess. It was hard for me to articulate myself. So uh, I think on top of that, it's there's a lot of like people are equating American conservatism with fascism, which is a really nasty word. And sometimes, in some instances, it may be true, and other instances, it might not be. So it's kind of that's the thing there, is that it's a big blanket. It's kind of a sweeping generalization, right? But nobody wants to be labeled a fascist or a Nazi or any of those nasty words. So I think a lot of young people feel that it's just better to keep quiet, so that they don't have to deal with that, maybe.
Mind if I comment?
Go ahead.
So I heard this phrase the other day, which was really interesting, and it said, if you aren't a liberal when you're young, you don't have a heart, or you don't have a heart. If you aren't conservative when you're old, you don't have a mind. Now, I thought that was really interesting, because it is very descriptive of, when you're younger, when you're in your late teens, 20s, you're passionate. You want to change the world. You want to get out there and you want to fix the things that look wrong to you. And you see people suffering and you say that's unjust and you want to change that. And that's not wrong. That's good. That means like you care, you have a heart, right? You want to help things change for the better, right? But I think what the comment is referring to is that as you get older, you realize that there's a lot of dynamics and a lot of things that also come into play that make things the way they are. And the problem with, I think, when you're younger and you see injustice or what you feel like is injustice, you feel like the way to go about it is and if it doesn't happen as quickly as you want it to happen, so you get out there and you become aggressive or whatever. And we're seeing that with cancel culture and saying, if you don't agree with this, like, we're going to shut you down, whatever. And I mean, I don't think this necessarily is a recent phenomenon. You saw in the 60s and early 70s, protests against Vietnam on college campuses, and people spitting on American troops coming back from the war when they had nothing to do with the decision to go to war. And so when we vilify people that are within the system that have nothing to do with the system and maybe have just a different opinion or a perspective, that shuts down the ability to have the conversations that we're trying to instill here at ONC and try and have. Because I believe that the best idea is going to win out, whatever that is. If there's civil dialogue, it's going to win out. And so I would just encourage everybody that, or just like, as you're going through this, just keep in mind that it's not the people that we want to be against or that we want to hate. It's not the people that we're fighting against, really. It's almost more of an idea, and the best idea will win in a place that has free-flowing discussion and conversation. So
No, I totally understand that perspective. And I still can't help but think, though, that Gen Z is getting tired of the traditional political system, which is why we're seeing other movements rise up, like the no labels movement, the Green Party movement. We see these type of platforms skyrocketing because a lot of Gen Zers and millennials, I even say, are becoming dismayed from the traditional parties. But nonetheless, we see Gen Z adults continuously leaning towards Democrats. And Devin, why do you think we're seeing this? Why are Gen Z adults seemingly preferring the Democrat Party?
Because they cater to the social issues that younger people usually like tend to gravitate towards. For the most part, like I said, LGBTQ, even if it's some of it, for the most part, in my opinion, is like kind of virtue signaling, because I don't think the Democrats necessarily care, excuse me, about some of these issues. I think they care about more of their electorate and maintaining their seats. That's why you see that's why you see some of the ages of these people. Dianne Feinstein just died at like 91, 93. In her like that's ridiculous. I mean, Nancy Pelosi's in her upper 70s, 80s. Biden's 81. He's the oldest president ever. So I think that we gravitate towards the Democratic Party because for some of us who lean more left than the Democratic Party specifically, it's our only option. We have to, in order for us to expand upon this, we have to compensate for the meantime until we are able to manifest the political power to institutionalize our own ideals. And the Democrats obviously lean that. Republicans are obviously in the complete opposite spectrum. So for now, we just have to subside some of our like free-flowing ideas and just commit. And obviously, hopefully, we'll win out. So.
Any response there, Connor, onto why some Gen Z adults just can't help but go left?
Can't help but, what was that?
But go left, lean more towards the Dem side.
Yeah, you know what, I think, oh boy. I think that a lot of that stems from, you could probably trace it back to when societies, I think when societies become very, very wealthy, they tend to become decadent. And that's when people kind of start to pick at the fabric of society itself, because they're kind of, they want to affect change in the world. And the way my grandfather's generation affected that change was through struggle. He was a pilot over the Pacific theater in World War II. But it's difficult in the age of being a keyboard warrior and a hardworking college student, when we live in this pretty well-to-do society. I think, especially when you're young, like Nate was just saying, and I actually can relate to a lot of that, is like that you have this passion that you want to change the world. So you kind of start looking for things. You say, well, where can we improve? Even though our society might be pretty well off to begin with. And I think that's where Gen Z is kind of looking towards. They're looking, I think they're following the legacy of people like Herbert Marcuse, who was the socialist professor at UCSD, I believe during the 80s. And he was persecuted by the Reagan administration for being so left-leaning, especially during the Cold War. He was a communist. But I think they're kind of following that sort of ideological footpath of their predecessors, because it is enticing. It's very when you look at all this injustice in the world, you wanna make a change, and that kind of like class, like oppressor oppressed lens, re-examining our country and the character and the fabric of it. That's definitely an important thing. We can't just say, oh well, America's free of flaws, because it's not. Absolutely, it's not. But that's the lens they've chosen to view America through. And so I think that that's their way of kind of fighting back at the system is through more left-leaning policies.
On that idea of change, so coming from NPR, we see that young Americans are continuing to show weak enthusiasm for President Biden in the entire Republican presidential primary pool. Plus, nearly a quarter of young people remain politically undecided when choosing between the incumbent president and an unnamed eventual Republican nominee, even though I believe we all know who's going to be the Republican nominee. But what does Gen Z want to see in politics? What kind of policy do we believe they want to see that's going to make them become decideful when it comes to the upcoming presidential election? Again, anyone can go ahead and jump in onto this question, but I'll give you the floor first, Devin.
From my perspective, and for someone who's like pretty online when it comes to multitude of communities that are mostly in their 20s to like 30s, I'd say, even teens, like upper teens. But I think the most that we yearn for, at least within this generation, is that the policy, specifically affordable housing, healthcare, more accessible and affordable healthcare, especially for gender affirming. I think the expulsion of some of what, again, this could be up for debate. Like, I think Connor and I would have a great debate pertaining to this about the historical analysis of this dilemma. But the institutional structures of systemic racism per se, and the trickle down effect from Jim Crow to even the civil rights to now, and how like most African American communities, even Hispanic communities, are marginalized for the most part when it comes to accessibility for education, for healthcare, and their socioeconomic conditions are dilapidated comparatively to that of the upper middle class, which is predominantly white. If you want to look at this phenomenon, you can look at the South American South, specifically around near me, basically Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and also the one other phenomenon that is like pretty prominent here is obesity. It's a really big issue. That's another thing that I think Americans need to deviate from. And I think Gen Z can embody this talking point as well, and I think there's in some circles this is a thing, but is our perseverance to like deviate away from the excessive fast food and like unhealthy products that we consume on the daily, whether it be soda, yes, the fast food, and just the like over processed stuff that we consume on a daily basis. Also, when it comes to the environment, that's the other big thing. I think obviously Gen Zs and even millennials are heavy on environmentalism because it's going to directly affect us mostly, since global warming has been a consistent thing for the past, let's just say, 50 years, and has been taken seriously, at least within the past 20. And now when we hit our 40s and 50s, even 60s, it's going to impact us specifically because because people and politicians decide not to take it too seriously, which Biden has done decent on. That's the one thing that he was doing decent up until his drop off because of Israel. But they did enact certain things through the Inflation Reduction Act for a bit there. But yeah, I would say like healthcare, affordability for housing, like I said, civil rights for gender affirming care for like LGBTQ, and then like definitely environmentalism. I think those are like just 4 of maybe like 5 to 6 specific policies that we really yearn for in this generation.
What about you, Connor? What do you believe Gen Z wants to see in politics?
I think that I don't know. I think that they kind of want to build something new. I think there's a lot of anger, like righteous anger among Gen Z, because they're so concerned with the way, like I said, the way they view the world through that like that class lens, like oppressed and oppressed. I think that they're concerned about a lot of these issues, and it makes them not only agitated, but really concerned and angry, and they want to use that energy to affect positive change on behalf of those causes. So I think sometimes that kind of manifests in ways that tend to be more like anarchical. It does feel a little like discombobulated, and like there's not necessarily like a head on the leadership, or like a specific pathway forward, or an itinerary that they're following. But and maybe as they get older, that'll be something that will kind of naturally manifest. But at times over the last 5 years or so, the last few years, it kind of just comes out. I feel like in these like emotional outbursts and public decrying of institutions and movements, or governments and different regimes around the world. And those are all noble sentiments for sure. And I think as they get older and they go on to land jobs in the professional sphere, in the institutions, that they'll be able to channel those sentiments into like a coherent policy. Yeah.
Interesting. What I also see happening in some discourses is this idea of building back America, from the popular Trump slogan of Make America Great Again to the new slogan of Building Back America, where the younger generation wants to see this shift from hyper youth involvement abroad to more involvement into domestic issues. People could also refer to this as Buy America. Do we think this is something that Gen Z in the future is going to be focusing more on building back America? And anyone is open to this question.
I think absolutely is the answer.
Don't disagree. Yeah, I mean, I think we want the viability that was the post-war era from around, like, let's just say 1950 to 1965, but we don't want that. I mean, specifically in this generation, we don't want that like binary, specifically that binary, like heterosexual breadwinner brings home the money and, like, the wife stays at home. We want that like economic viability that people had at that time. The middle class in America was like exceptionally like prominent by that point in time due to the backlog of the post-war economy. So the biggest thing right now is just the economics conditions in which it's just really hard for us to find housing. One stereotype that I was going to attribute earlier was just I don't like the notion that Gen Z specifically is expecting too much. There's been like reports that like companies are having issues when it comes to the hiring process for Gen Z, because Gen Z is going into it expecting too many benefits and too much pay in quotations. I think that's just too much. These companies have had too much backing within their willfulness to just underpay people. Like, I think everybody should literally have like healthcare guaranteed, the dental, whatever. Like, you could get into the minutia of it, you know what I mean? But like, at least like healthcare, like transportation needs to be revitalized per se. But like, I definitely think the economic viability that we had like almost like 2 generations ago is what we really yearn for, just in an altered state that doesn't socially like transcribe to the same like mannerisms per se.
So, like, for example, I am a Gen Zer, I guess you can say. When it comes to the change, like, I want to see in politics, I am what you call a hopeful cynic. I live in two worlds, where I'm very critical of our current political leaders who tell me when they're running for office that they're going to do this type of platform. They're going to encourage X, Y, and Z. But when they actually get into office, we don't see any of that, because they're not really seeing support, or they just don't want to lose donors, right? But in this other world, which I see here reflected in this room in ONC, is this want for change, right? Of this not wanting to point fingers, to really get to the core of the issue. And that makes me think, what is the new Gen Z American dream? what is their new Americana? What do you think are the things that we value now that is different from millennials and baby boomers? Do we think there is a change, or do we think it's quite similar? Maybe even Jeff can pop up on this question on what he may believe the new American dream may be.
You know, there's an old saying, what goes around comes around, and there's nothing new under the sun. I actually would like to see a return to some old-fashioned values. I think when I was your age, there was more of a feeling that life was a little more fair. And I think to Devin's point, we really did have economic opportunities in those days that you guys don't have. I would like to see a return to integrity. I think just there's too much lying going on, too much misinformation. It's all about winning. It's all about sticking it to the other side. You know, nobody really seems to care that much about policy right now. And I see Jordan just typed something into the chat saying basically the same thing. We're seeing this play out right now before our very eyes. Today is February 5th. There's an immigration reform bill that the Senate has been working on for a while, a bipartisan attempt to come up with some sort of an agreement that both sides could live with. And already the House Republicans are talking about doing everything they can to torpedo the bill. And Donald Trump is saying, you know, we don't want to pass it because that would be a win for Biden. Well, that doesn't seem, that's not the America I grew up in. Back in our day, things were far less partisan, and somehow or another, Republicans and Democrats were able to work together more closely. We had conservative Democrats, we had liberal Republicans. There wasn't this dividing line the way there is now. It was much more mushed together. Now, it's true, it was also very male, stale, and pale, as somebody put it the other day. It was a bunch of old white guys who were running the show. So life is a lot more inclusive now, and I think that's a really good thing. I think it's the best thing that I see coming out of Gen Z is that you guys get along so well in ways that we just didn't. And that gives me great hope that a lot of these social problems that we've had over the years with racism and sexism and all that, it seems like it's just going to fade away in your lifetime. So on one hand, I have great hope for you guys, and on the other hand, I feel for you. You know, you've been dealt some bad cards here. And I think part of our purpose here at ONC is to help you guys gain the tools that you're going to need to take over the world, because you're going to inherit this situation pretty soon. The oldsters are going to, you know, peel away and die off. And maybe it's time. Maybe it's time for us to pass the baton and get out of the way. I think the two-party system is broken. I personally would love to see a centrist party. I don't know that that's going to happen. That's not something that we, as a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, can lobby for. But it just makes sense to me that there's a big chunk of people in the middle who have been left behind, and they're pretty voiceless, and we no longer have the ability to compromise. So something's got to change. Something big has got to change, in my opinion.
Mind if I say something? I think it's the dream has stayed the same. It hasn't certainly always been great, obviously, as we know, but I think the dream is still we the people. I think it's and that's not, I'm not trying to sound like I don't know, whatever the word is, flippant, but it's we the people. It's this happening right here, this discussion, this, like, everybody coming together, talking about it, talking through it. Like, what is, what do we want to see? How can we get there? And the trouble, I think, the challenge is when we think the dream is a house with a white picket fence and a family, or whatever that next dream is. It doesn't have, that was the previous American dream, but what's the next dream? Whatever that looks like. But it's not like some kind of end state of, I'm trying to get to this point. I think it's my perspective is that it's us, everybody contributing, talking, working these things out, and continuing to come to a better and better nation, and that's more just and more free, so I think it's this, in some ways, it's not great. And the trouble is it doesn't always feel good. But I think this is, in many ways, a great, a great thing to be a part of, is when we're together and doing it together. I think that's a big part of it. So,
For those of you who are new, I want to bring to your attention that an earlier class of interns, there's actually several classes. It took us a while to put this together, but they actually wrote a book called Let's Fix America. It's available on Amazon. I'm not trying to sell books here, but I do think you would benefit if you got a copy and read it. We had students go over lots and lots of policy discussions, and they came up with reasonable compromises that they believed Republicans and Democrats and centrists could all pretty much agree on. We set a threshold of 60%. We said, let's shoot for ideas that probably 60% or more of Americans could agree on. And we had a polling team that verified all that by checking out all these proposals against available data out there. We did it. We've done a lot of the homework. If we could just send this book to Congress and say, here, do this, I think America would be a much better place. Now, it doesn't work like that in the real world. We have to fight our way into the arena. And then once we're there, we got to fight to stay there. But I personally think we're onto something here, and that the pendulum is going to swing pretty soon back in our direction. I think people are going to get so fed up with all the partisanship that, if somebody can provide a sane alternative, I think people one day are going to wake up and say, yeah, that's what we want. So I want you guys to have faith that we're getting there. We just got to keep inching forward.
I could see from the Gen Z American dream definitely revolves around what Devin has said before about having more affordable housing, having more ability to have free time in general be really great. Healthcare is also a very important thing. Gen Zs are more concerned about with the rising cost of it and inaccessibility of healthcare. But overall, I think the American dream has, commonalities with the baby boomers, millennials. And I do agree with Jeff. I think there's going to be a sort of shift back into some sort of wantness for the traditional values. What do we think, Devin? What do we think, Connor?
I think that there's a balance to be struck with traditional values. I'm a conservative, and those are all things that I abide by. It doesn't mean that I keep my girlfriend locked up in the kitchen or anything like that, right? It just, these are all, to me, values that are an integral part of the American soul and the American way of life as it was laid out in 1776. So, I sometimes it's hard for me to get on board with some of the people who are really, really on the radical side of the left wing cause to completely rip out the integrity and the a lot of these values that this country was founded on. While certainly I think that there's room for improvement and to make adjustments to the social fabric of our society, which we have done a lot since then. I think that it's important that we don't completely pull the rug out from underneath the table. I think we need a melding of both of these things, and it's important not to become so tied up in a sense of righteous justice that you're kind of like blind with fury to the things, the nature parts of the American soul that are inseparable from the American way of life as we know it. So I think it's a blending of the two, really.
For me personally, I have no quarrel with that. As a since he applied his label as a democratic socialist. I personally believe in the ability for anybody to enact on their own free will, as in I don't believe in any restrictions on the ability of people to function as they please, whether it comes to their sexuality, their economic prosperity, or just their day-to-day activities. I believe that people should be able to do as they please, as long as it's not illegal and causing harm to anyone, to thy neighbor, basically speaking. So I have, like, for me, for instance, I have no worth for like traditional values within my life. But if Connor per se has that, if he embodies those like customs, I have no issue with that person speaking. I just don't like to see legislation being pushed through certain states that restrict the healthcare or the ability for people to just live as they would deem appropriate for themselves. So yeah, just liberty, fraternity, and economic prosperity for all. So
Would anyone like to add to that on what they believe is like the new American dream? Anyone, particularly in Gen Z, like to share their perspective before we move on to the next questions?
all I'm going to add personally, unless someone chimes in as well, all I'm going to add is just that I think legitimately, as simple as it sounds, like we just want to live, as in, like we said earlier, like have the economic viability, but also to the point where we can afford a house, we can have a car, and we don't have to work 50 to 45 hours a week just to get by making what the nation minimum wage is. For instance, we just want to, and I've done that. I literally before this past year, before this me working in politics locally, before all that, I did that for like 40 hours, 42 hours a week at a restaurant. So we just want to literally live and be able to afford things effectively, and just be basically economic producers within the system in play.
Devin, I'd like to touch on that actually. That's a really good point, is that yeah, I think that the younger generations, Gen Z, they don't want to, yeah, they don't want to work their entire life away into the grave. And I think anybody can get on board with that. And people are just young people are really, really having a hard time these days. Like I don't know if anybody wants to speak out against this, but I feel like I'm pretty safe in saying that I speak for the majority of us when I say that things are not as easy for us in today's world as they were for my parents' generation, the baby boomers, being born into literally the most economically prosperous era of American history, when the man could afford to take out a mortgage on on one job as a cashier at AutoZone or Walmart or something like that, or in a steel factory, while the wife could stay at home and raise a family, and buy two cars on that sort of income. I mean, if you were to look somebody else in the eye, another young person, and tell them that, they'd say you're crazy. You'd need four incomes or at least two really, really high paying incomes for that sort of lifestyle. And so I think where I'm going with this is that I think that a lot of that economic frustration and that kind of hopelessness and feeling of despair among young people, I think it's sad, young people, I think, are, some of them, kind of just like for the moment giving up on dreams of home ownership. As where my parents, at 20, they had a house and like a couple kids and like a couple cars, like that doesn't exist anymore. So I think a lot of that, like as we're getting older into our 20s and early 30s, and people can't even afford to have kids, for Christ's sake, like in their early 30s often. Out of all my friends, I have plenty of friends in their early 30s, and only one of them has kids, because they can't afford it anymore. So I think a lot of that economic disparity and despair is contributing to this pitting people into their corners and taking, decisive political and radical political positions and saying, no, you're to blame for this, no, the right wingers are to blame, the left wingers are to blame. That's why we're in such a mess.
There's a school of thought which is deeply cynical, which basically says the Democrats and the Republicans are actually in cahoots. It's sometimes referred to as the firm. It's like they have a company that they're running, and the people at the top are pulling the strings and keeping us all agitated and angry at each other, so we can't really even see how manipulated we really are. If we're mad at each other because she's a lesbian and he's black, or whatever the issue might be, we're not able to see that the big guys at the top keep getting richer and the people on the bottom rungs of the ladder are stuck. And it's a frightening thought, but they often refer to this as the deep state. It's like the people in Washington who have control over everything don't want to let go of that power and that control. And the current way things play out, it's hard for people at the grassroots level to have a real impact.
Jeff, real quick, that's a really good point. I mean, this isn't something I talk about too often because it is kind of an out there idea, but that's definitely the view, the worldview that I subscribe to. I've always been very cynical. Sometimes it serves me well, other times it doesn't. And I have friends who are glaring optimists, and we balance each other out. That's the beautiful thing about friendships. But I think that a lot of people don't really, in my opinion, don't really realize that, you really shouldn't. Don't look at the right. Don't look at the left. There are people who are harboring very specific interests, and they're not in your interests or my interests or on any side of the political spectrum, and they stand to profit from us becoming divided.
I can't tell you how many texts I get every single day asking me to make a contribution for this politician or that. And they're always worded pretty much the same way. The other side is bad. Send me $5 now and we'll save the day. This anger thing that's going on, it's people are exploiting it and taking advantage of the situation.
I was just going to say just to add to that, you are completely correct, both of you at least are. But the issue at hand is that there isn't a collective awareness. There's no class consciousness for the most part on the ground for like at least the lower class for the most part. Just due to the amount of hours and stuff like that we have to work, and people aren't like that politically are just not that politically knowledgeable at the end of the day, just due to this. But not to get overly academic here, but I'll just apply one. I'll just assert this really quickly. Within the Marxist school of thought, this specific instance is called the base superstructure model, where the base being the underlying social conditions, material conditions in which we abide by and live in. And the superstructure is the powers in play which set the grounds in which we live in. So billionaires, obviously, for instance, bribe politicians. Harlan Crow was the billionaire who was reported of giving Clarence Thomas, the conservative Supreme Court judge, trips to random places like the Philippines or something like that, like extravagant trips. And that's why I said, for instance, Citizens United is like it needs to be rebuked completely or revoked completely, because money in politics, to me, is disgusting and is completely detracting us from where we need to go. It starts with like the influence of the complete upper class influencing the policies that go into play so that they can maintain their power and maintain the status quo, because they are the ones who dictate things for the most part. So yes, basically speaking, though, I'm in complete agreement here on that one.
Real quick, Devin, before we move on, that this is coming from somebody who, I mean, I'm conservative now, but in my late teens and early 20s, I was a devout Marxist, a socialist, and so I'm familiar with the ideology. I mean, you said there's no class consciousness among Americans now, which is true. I mean, that's something that Herbert Marcuse at UCSD taught his radical left-wing students, that, you know, that conscious is now dormant. I wouldn't even say dormant. I just think that the need for really radical policy of or ideology of any kind, and, you know, Marxism and socialism is one of those. I think the need for Marxism and socialism or its ideas kind of became irrelevant as capitalism showed a capacity to reform itself, and that's something that Marx wasn't able to foresee. You know, he wrote. I understand the sentiment behind his writings and why he wrote what he wrote. It all sounds great on paper, but when you have children working 14-hour days in factories, of course, you want to mobilize the consciousness, the political consciousness of the working class to recognize their own plight and rally for change violently in the Marxist case. But that consciousness is no longer existent because capitalism reformed itself, and Americans, the working class in America went from 12-year-olds working 14-hour days in factories to electricians or X, Y, and Z.
People performing Uber Eats for 10 hours just to make whatever.
Or just not even that. I mean, when you look back on the last few decades of American history, 50 years, I mean, people living good lives. People working regular work weeks, 40-hour work weeks. That's not an excessive amount of time to work, and it's not a
wages have stagnated though, and also
recently, yeah. But if you look back on the post-war era, since the end of World War II, I mean, Marx could have never foreseen the fact that we would form unions and that people would get fair pay for their positions, and that they would be able to, believe it or not, Mr. Marx, own a home, a single-family home with 3 rooms, 2 for your kids, 1 for you and your wife, instead of living and sleeping underneath a cardboard box in a slum in New York City, because those were the kind of conditions that he was observing. So, but I think largely the need for that sort of ideology, or the usefulness of it, is no longer relevant in my opinion.
We don't have to get into the distinctions specifically within this philosophical approach, because Tanya's diverting it. I don't want to intrude on my philosophical prescriptions to make that the thing here, but all I'm going to say is that it's still completely relevant. It's still completely prominent, because first off, he did advocate for labor unions, because he advocated for the mobilization of workers to obtain the means of production, hence labor unions basically. And also, in order for a communist state to come to fruition, you need to go through the trajectory, the economic development phases, from feudalism to capitalism to socialism to communism. So everything that is occurring right now is going, technically speaking, according to plan, until capitalism would devour itself to the point, which could be global warming. It could be, which is a product of capitalism. Over excessive use of carbon emissions is literally a direct result of capitalism, or class revolt, which I actually, personally speaking, don't even go for. I'm a democratic socialist. I read Marx's work, but I think communism is a utopian idea. I believe in a socialist state where we have democracy as the main function within the workplace and government, and it's a representation of the people overall. So point being though is I just detest your notion, Connor, respectfully. Obviously this is a good discussion, and I'm keeping it completely cordial here, but yeah, that's just coming from me here. If we're talking about the specifics is all. So
these are ideas that Gen Z are very concerned about. So it's good that we're talking about it.
No, I agree. And like what I've said before to everyone here, Gen Z is not a monolith. There are so many varying political ideologies we have here. And what we can do just now is to try to understand the perspectives we have going around. And before we close out this conversation, Jeff, I know you have some questions you would love to ask, so go ahead.
Okay, so we're in this partisan mess right now, and we have two old candidates, and people aren't very inspired by the choice. Probably the case that a third party isn't really going to make it to the finish line in 2024. So let's look ahead all the way to 2028 and even beyond. I'm wondering, are there any up and coming political leaders who inspire you? Is there anybody out there on the horizon who you think, wow, maybe one day that person could be president, and when that happens, that person will make a difference?
I mean, I was really on the Pete Buttigieg train for a long time, up until like all the controversy happened. But I would love someone like him. But then again, I'm someone who will prefer a third party running for office as opposed to the traditional Democrat and Republican Party. But someone like him, a true moderate, because I'm a moderate at heart. So someone who's willing to look at both perspectives and really come together. But then again, I know moderates are typically looked at as either being a sheep in wolf's clothing for either the blue or the left. So something like that.
Unfortunately, from my perspective, no. There's nobody that I find, because obviously I'm not a conservative. On the Democratic side, I don't see anybody. I don't even know what they're gonna do going forward. I think in 2028, they're gonna go with Gavin Newsom. And he's just a standard corporatist, liberal, neoliberal, we could say maybe, who, this is again what I was applying earlier, kind of embodies the aura of the Democratic Party, which is like, oh, we care about your social issues, yeah, but we're also gonna get donorship from like, really expensive people, like high-end people for the most part. So it's like, personally speaking, on the Democratic side, I don't see anybody for the near future, but I will predict that they're gonna go with Gavin probably in 2028, so.
How about AOC?
Yes, but she's young. She's like, she's in the house. Like, I think she needs a little bit more of a tenure, which could be these 4 years, maybe. It's just like Jeff, you might be able to extrapolate further on this. How often does a house, like, yeah, how often does a house member run for president? You know what I mean?
Every 2 years.
No, run for president,
Oh,
right? Like that doesn't happen really that
once
much.
in a while, but they don't get very far.
Exactly. So if she's gonna do it, she needs to propel herself further into like the Senate, along with Ilhan Omar, or somebody along those lines, who's part of the progressive caucus in the House. But it'll take time. I think our generation, once we get the mantle of the political power, I have faith that there will be prominent voices. It's just gonna take time. Like once we're like the age of like Vivek Ramaswamy, and we have like our Vivek for the most part at like 38, almost 40 years old, I think that's when we can start seeing voices. But obviously, we all have like a while to go still. So for the time being, I think it's kind of like a stagnant situation.
How about Andrew Yang?
He tried, but it didn't really pan out. He tried with that third party, but it didn't really pan out.
Okay. All right, Tanya, I will hand it over, but I'd like to plant a seed of a question in your brains, and you can think about it, and we can talk about it another time. It was said earlier that we don't really have a class consciousness that uh, causes people to rally. I'm wondering, is there any way you, as Gen Z future leaders of America, could bring about a social movement based on nonpartisan problem solving? What we're doing here at ONC. I've often felt like if we could just turn this into a social mission and get people excited about it, we could generate numbers and create power here.
I mean, I think it's like what you mentioned before, being that perspective of like openness and dialogue, of wanting to have less hate, more debate, being that maybe the channel for that could be where we can reach Gen Z in this new age, and maybe for some people call cynicism or like hyperpolarization. Maybe we can be that channel where you can get people talking. I think that's where our niche is.
I like that slogan, by the way. And Elijah, I see he's here in the room. He came up with that. That was a good one, Elijah. Um, is that enough to get people excited? Would people rally to that? Less hate, more debate.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, yeah, it might sound a little, uh, it might sound like a little bit of a moral cliche at first, but it's about what you, and this all circles back to the beginning of our conversation this evening when we were talking about, um, when I was talking about like kind of like enacting that change and embodying it, I see like a lot of among Gen Z, it kind of seems to be a recurring theme. I'm not trying to be disparaging here, but I see a lot of just like platitudes of just like, oh, here we work hard to create an inclusive environment where everybody can feel free to step up to the podium and say how they really feel, or people will say that at the beginning of meetings or this and that. But that's kind of just like a given these days, right? So if we can do something to, and I think it has to be in numbers, if we can all embody this and make an effort to showcase it, um, instead of just like, the leadership, or you, Jeff, or you, Tanya, or me, because I'm in a position of leadership. Um, if we can somehow foster this greater spirit of animation, among young people, through us interacting with each other and showing other people that, hey, we can share our opinions and sometimes they're strong, and but we all get along anyways, and it's important because we're creating channels of dialogue where we're getting, I forgot who said it earlier, maybe you, Jeff, where we're getting to the core of the issue here, right? And you do that through deliberation and expressing yourself.
Yeah, definitely. Again, thank you, Devin and Connor, for giving us your time today to share about the perspectives that may be around Gen Z. And I hope everyone had a great conversation. I know I did. I know what to name a few things now. So thank you, everyone. And remember to check us out on social media. We're posting really fun infographics concerning US politics.